ነከረች እንዲሁም ደግሞ 2063 አጀንዳን ለማሳካት ደግሞ ህብረት ያስፈልጋል። ለዚህ ደግሞ ቅድም ሮዛ ስቲው እንደነበረው ከ70% በላይ የሚሆኑ የአህጉሪቱ ወጣቶች ደግሞ ቀጥታ ተሳታፊ በመሆን ለነሱ የስራ ዕድል በመፍጠር በፖለቲካ በማህበራዊና ኢኮኖሚያዊ ተግባራቶች ላይ ደግሞ ቀጥታ ተሳታፊ በማድረግ ለዚች አህጉር ተረካቢ ወጣቶች ናቸው ተብሏል።
እውነት ነው። እንግዲህ በዋናነት ይሄ ጉባኤ ሲከናወን ከአራት በላይ ዋነኛ የሚባሉ ጉዳዮችን በማንገብ ነው። የመጀመሪያው አፍሪካ አንድ ልትሆን የሚገባትን ሂደት የጀመረችበት አግባብ አለ። ስለዚህ እነዚህ ሂደቶች ተጠናክረው እንዲቀጥሉ ወጣቱ በአንድነት ለጋራ ችግሮቹ መፍትሄ ሊያስቀምጥ የሚችልበትን ድባብና አውድ የመፍጠር ሂደቱን በተመለከተ ለዛ ማሳኪያ እንዲሆን በሚል የተጀመረ ጉባኤ ነው። ሁለተኛው ርዕሰ ሀሳብ እንደተባለው የፓን አፍሪካኒዝም አቀንቃኝ ሆነው የአህጉሪቱ አባቶቻችን በተለይም የጥቁር አፍሪካውያን አባቶችና እናቶች በርካታ ትግል አድርገዋል ከቀኝ ግዛት ለመላቀቅ። ከዛም በኋላ ደግሞ የአፍሪካን የፖለቲካም የኢኮኖሚ አንድነቷም እንዲመጣ ብዙ ጥረቶችን በማድረጋቸው ይታወቃል። ይህን ጥረት ታዲያ አሁን ላይ ላሉ አፍሪካ የገጠማት ላለው ማህበራዊ ችግር፣ አፍሪካ የገጠማት ላለው የፖለቲካና የኢኮኖሚ ችግር ልክ በተመሳሳይ አውጥቶ አሁን ላሉ ችግሮቿ መፍትሄ ለመስጠት የፓን አፍሪካኒዝም እሳቤ ከአንዱ ወደ ሌላው ተሻግሮ ያንን እንዲወጣ በማድረግ ረገድ ሀሳቦች ሊሰነዘሩ ይገባል። ያንን ደግሞ ወደ ተሞክሮ መቀየር ይገባል የሚለው ሀሳብ ነው። ከዛ ባለፈ 2063 አጀንዳ እንግዲህ እንደሚታወቀው ለአፍሪካ ወጣቶች ትልቁን ድርሻ የሰጠ ነው። 2063 ላይ የወጣቶች ተሳትፎን የወሳኝነት ሚናቸውን ማሳደግ ትልቅ ቦታ እንዳለ ይታወቃልና በዚህ መልኩ ይህንን ማሳካት አንደኛው ትልም ተደርጎ የተቀመጠ ነው። ከዛ ሁሉ ባሻገር ግን ኢትዮጵያ ያሳካቻቸው ትልልቅ የሚባሉ ጉዳዮች በአመቱ እንዳሉ ይታወቃል። ከአረንጓዴ አሻራ ጋር በተገናኘ ወጣቶች ትልቅ ተሳትፎ ያሳዩበት ነው። ከዛ ጎን ለጎን ደግሞ የምናስታውሰው የዚህ የቮለንተሪዝም ወይም ደግሞ የበጎ አድራጎት ስራዎች ላይ ወጣቶችን በስፋት ማሳተፍ የቻለችበት ሁኔታዎች ተፈጥረዋል። እነዚህ ነገሮች እንደ አፍሪካ እንዲሰፉም ተሞክሮ እንዲቀሰምባቸው በማድረግ ረገድ ሰፊ ርቀቶችን ለመሄድ ያለመ ጉባኤም ጭምር ነው አድርገን የምንመለከተው።
በተለይ ደግሞ ኢትዮጵያ ውስጥ ያሉ ስኬቶችን በማየት ረገድ በትናንትናው ዕለት እንግዲህ እንደምናስታውሰው ማለት ነው እንደዚህ ወጣቶች የኢፌዴሪ አየር ኃይልን የመከላከያ ሰራዊት መስሪያ ቤትን እንዲሁም ደግሞ የፌዴራል ፖሊስንና የሳይንስ ሙዚየምን ጎብኝተው ስሜታቸውን ሲያጋሩን ጭምር ነበር። ኢትዮጵያ እንግዲህ በርካታ ተምሳሌት ነች ለአፍሪካውያን አንድነትና መጠናከር። ከዚህ በፊት የሰራችውን ደግሞ አሁን በአዲሱ ትውልድ ለመተካት ዓላማ ያነገበ ነው። እንግዲህ በተለይ የምዕራባውያን ሀገራቶች አፍሪካ ላይ ማማተራቸው የማይቀር ነው። በተለይ ደግሞ የኢኮኖሚ ጥገኛ ከሆን አይቀር የሚላለ ኢኮኖሚ ጥገኛ ከመሆን ይልቅ ግን በልማቱ ላይ ሰፊ መሬቶች አሉን፣ ውሃዎች አሉን፣ ህዝብ አለን። እሱ ላይ ተረባርበን መስራት ከቻልን ደግሞ ከኢኮኖሚ ጥገኝነት ወጥተን አንድ የጠነከረች አፍሪካን መፍጠር ይቻላል የሚል ሀሳቦች የተነሱበት ወጣቱ ትውልድ ደግሞ በተለይ ባህሉን እሴቱን ይዞ አፍሪካ እንዲሁም ሀገር በቀል እውቀቶች ጭምር ያለባት ስለሆነ እሱ ላይ መስራት ከቻልን አፍሪካን ቀጥ አድርገን ማራመድ የምንችልበት የጠነከረች እንዲሁም አንድ የሆነች አፍሪካ መፍጠር እንችላለን ብሏል። በተለይ ደግሞ ነጻ የንግድ ቀጠናዎች በየአካባቢው እየተፈጠሩ ነው ያሉትና እነሱን በመጠቀም ረገድ ነጻ ቪዛዎችም አፍሪካን አንድ በማድረግ ረገድ ሊሰራ ይገባል የተባለበት ነበር። ዛሬ እንግዲህ መቋጫውን ያገኛልና አሁን ባለንበት የአፍሪካ ኢኮኖሚክ ኮሚሽን ደግሞ የተለያዩ መሰናዶዎችም አሉ።
እውነት ነው። እንግዲህ የተወዳጁ ተመልካቾቻችን መሰናዶዎቹን እየተከታተላችሁ እንድትቆዩ እኛም ከወዲሁ እንጋብዛለን። እንዳጠቃላይ ግን በቆይታቸው እንዳነጋገርናቸውም ከሆነ እጅግ ደስተኞች ስለመሆናቸው የአፍሪካ ወጣቶች ጉባኤ ላይ ተሳታፊ የሆኑ ወጣቶች ነግረውናል። በዋናነት መሪውን የቀጣይ መሪዎች አፍሪካውያንን ወጣቶችን በማነቃቃት ከዛም ደግሞ ችግሮቻቸውን መፍትሄ እንዲሰጡ በማድረግ ረገድ የተጀመረው እንቅስቃሴ በአፍሪካ የወጣቶች ህብረት እንዲመሰረት ለማድረግ የሚያስችሉ ሰነዶችንም የመፈተሽና ቀጣይ እንቅስቃሴዎችን ጸድቆም እንደ ህብረት ለመንቀሳቀስ የሚያስችሉ ድሎች እንዳሉ የሚታመንበት ነው ማለት ነው። የቀጥታ ስርጭታችንን የተወደዳችሁ የተመለከታችሁ እንድትቆዩ እንጋብዛለን።
guyyaa jalqabaatirraa eegalee dhimmoota adda addaa keessummeessaatiin turee jira. Egaan yaa'iin kun guyyoota afran darbanitti dhimmoota adda addaa keessummeessaatii ture. Har'a guyyaa cufiinsaa irratti argamne jechuudha. Egaan yaa'iin kunis ergaa ijoo the integrated Africa as the bridge of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed yookaan immoo riqichummaa ministeera muummee Abiy Ahmediin Afrikaa waltaate yookaan qindaawaa taate uumuu ergaa jedhuun kan taamaatiin jiru jechuudha. Egaan yaa'ii kanarratti dhimmoonni garaagaraas kaaniitii turan jechuudha. Guyyaa afran kanatti mariinni dargaggootaa tureera. Dhimmoota adda addaatiin taamaatii kan ture. Har'a galma koomishinii diinagdee gamtaa Afrikaatti sirni cufiinsaa ni taasifama jechuudha. Egaan immoo sirna kanarrattis ministeerri muummeen Abiy Ahmedis sirna kanarratti argamuudhaan namoota hooggantoota gamtaa Afrikaa fi sochii paan afrikaanizimii irratti qooda guddaa bahaniif beekamtii akka kennantu eegama jechuudha. Sanaafis ministeerri muummee Abiy Ahmed amma yeroo ammaa ani irratti argamu kanarratti gara galmaa seenaatti jiru jechuudha. Beekamtii kennuudhaaf asitti argamanii jiru. Egaan eenyutu beekamtii argata kan jedhus namoota kana dura sochii gamtaa Afrikaa hundeeffama gamtaa Afrikaa yookaan dhaabbata tokkummaa Afrikaa duraanirraa eegalamee haga har'aatti sochii tokkummaa fi walabummaa biyyoota Afrikaatiif namoota karaa adda addaatiin qabsoo bilisummaa keessatti dabalatee namoota gumaachaa turanidha kan beekamtii argatan jedhameeti kan eegamu jechuudha. Egaan kana wal qabateetis kan seekuu ture pirezidaantii Giinii isaan jalqabaa duraanii beekamtii akka argatanidha kan odeeffannoo arganne jechuudha. Taanzaaniyaa irraa akkasuma biyyoota adda addaa Zimbaabuwee irraa Roobert Mugaabees dabalatee mootiin Haayila Sillaaseetis pirezidaantiin Keeniyaa Joomoo Keeniyaataa dabalatee beekamtii akka argatanidha. Maatiin isaanii bakka argamanitti hooggantoota duraanii kanaaf beekamtiin akka kennamudha kan eegamu jechuudha. Sirni kunis asitti galma koomishinii diinagdee gamtaa Afrikaatti sirnoota adda addaatiin dabalamee akka raawwatamudha. Odeeffannoon arganne amma kan agarsiisu. Egaan walumaa galaan yaa'iin kun muuxannoo dargaggootaattis keessummeessee jira. Ganama iddoo pirezidaantiin duraanii Mulaatu Tashoomee argamanitti akkasuma immoo pirezidaantiin Gaanaa isaan duraanii Joon Diraamiinii Mahaamaatis bakka argamanitti muuxannoon dargaggootaa wal jijjiirameera. Dhimmoota rakkoo Afrikaa dabalatee fala maaltu ta'uu danda'a haala qabatamaa amma Afrikaan itti jirtu wal qabatee dhimmoonni hedduun kaanii jiru. Odeeffannoon as jiru hordofnee kan isin biraan geenyu ta'a jechuudha. Gabaasa ETV galma gamtaa Afrikaatirraaf qindaa'eef ani Teewodiroos Tolaati.
Diplomats of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ethiopia, honorable influential personalities, youth delegations from all African countries, including all over Ethiopia, honorable invited guests, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to the first African Youth Summit under the theme Integrated Africa, the bridge of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed from October 29th to the 1st of November 2022 here in Addis Ababa, the diplomatic seat of the African Union, proudly organized by the Office of the Prime Minister and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us for this high-level event. Your Excellency, Mr. Prime Minister, honorable ladies and gentlemen, the summit aims to promote Pan-Africanist vision and sentiment to prospective youth Africans and strengthen it.
The first ever African Youth Summit is happening here in the African capital, Addis Ababa, and today it is final day, and during the half day, the youth has seen the presence of former Ghanaian President John Dramani Mahama and the Ethiopian former President Dr. Mulaatu Tashoomee, and two of the former African leaders have shared their experiences to the youth gathered from all across the continent, and Dr. Mulaatu Tashoomee has raised issues in relation to economic development, and pertinent issues has been raised, and there were active interaction between the youth and the president. John Dramani Mahama has also raised issues in relation to history, about Pan-African history, and he has given thorough explanations about the Pan-African movement beginning from the slave trade, and his presentation was very nice. Previously, the colonizers have taken slaves from here and shipped them to their destination, but now they have raided green pasture, and the Africans are not taken by force, but they put attractive green pasture, and Africans are getting to foreign countries by themselves. And here with me is a participant from Cameroon. She is president of the Cameroonian Youth Council, and let's have her reflection about the half-day presentation from the two leaders of the continent.
I stand here before you with a great pleasure just to read out the outcome of the first African Youth Leaders Summit. It is to be recalled that the Agenda 2063 of the African Union Declaration has a list of aspirations, including an Africa whose development is people-driven, relying on the potential of African people, especially its women and youth, particularly dreaming to realize all that the citizens of Africa will be actively involved in decision-making in all aspects. In this regard, Africa shall an inclusive continent where no child, woman, or man will be left behind or excluded based on gender, political affiliation, religion, ethnicity, locality, age, or other factors, and in which an engaged and empowered youth plays a critical and constructive role. To contribute to the realization of this continental aspiration, Africa Youth representatives from 42 African countries gathered here in Addis Ababa from October 29, 2022 to the 1st of November. Upon the invitation of the Ethiopian government with strong sympathy and sentiment of revitalized Pan-Africanism that aims to create a united and integrated Africa as it has been dreamed by founding fathers of the OAU, the current AU. In this respect, over the first 4 days of the summit, the African youth representatives deliberated on important issues, including the past, present, and future of Africa, with a view of reinvigorating the Pan-Africanism movement, promoting African solutions for African problems, to address African challenges by Africans themselves, as well as the African role in the international governance and multilateral forums by reforming the global decision-making architecture. Hence, the African youth representatives reaffirmed that Pan-Africanism pioneered by the founding fathers is still relevant to tackle Africa's problems through integration, enhanced solidarity, and reinvigorated partnership. Furthermore, realizing the full independence of Africa in peace and security, economic, scientific, and technological fields remain outstanding and urgent priorities of our continent. In this connection, ensuring policy freedom is still a vital, critical issue to ensure the renaissance of Africa and to create the Africa we want. Therefore, in this regard, the African youth representatives, 1, underscore the importance of revitalization of Pan-Africanism that takes into consideration our founding fathers' dream of realizing the full independence of our continent through a genuine involvement of all African citizens, particularly the youth. 2, we welcome the initiative of Ethiopia to bring African youth representatives to discuss and revitalize Pan-Africanism and African solidarity and fraternity in the capital city of Africa, Addis Ababa, from October 29 to the 1st of November 2022. 3, we encourage other African countries and appropriate institutions of the AU to further enhance youth empowerment and inclusivity through similar initiatives to make African youth on top of their continental matters and to harness their positive contribution in multiple areas to address the challenges Africa faces and maximize the opportunities that our continent owns. Further, encourage the African Union and member countries to recognize the outcome of this summit and to take the matter to the attention of the African heads of state and government to formally create periodic summit or forum of African youth so that they could duly play their fair responsibility in every aspect of continental issues without overlapping and replacing any other institution or activities while ensuring complementary coordination and harmonization. Fully recognize multiple and interlinked continental challenges that are potentially diffused and induced by different factors, including external bodies and environments that undermine continental efforts to realize peace and stability, prosperity, and green and sustainable inclusive growth. Therefore, we are committed to working hard together and to further enhance our unity and solidarity to address the challenges of our continent, guided by the revitalized spirit of Pan-Africanism to realize the aspirations of the AU Agenda 2033. Express our deep concern about the devastating consequences of climate change, which is disproportionately affecting Africa. In this regard, we appreciate the Ethiopian Prime Minister, His Excellency Dr. Abiy Ahmed's Green Legacy Initiative that mobilized the entire nation to plant more than 25 billion trees in just 4 years. This vital initiative reaffirms that Africa has continued to play an important role in tackling the adverse impacts of climate change. We express our concern that Africa is underrepresented in the international multilateral forums, including the UN system, particularly at the UN Security Council. Thus, we understand to democratizing the international system, including the UN system, UN Security Council, and urge for the fair representation of the African continent through the revitalization and genuine reform of the global governance architecture, including the UN system. We call all African leaders and AU Commission to facilitate periodic African youth deliberation mechanisms in which the voice of youth are appropriately heard and youth are well recognized to harness their untapped talents for the realization of the dreams of our forefathers for Pan-Africanism. We encourage the AU Commission and member states to empower the youth according to existing frameworks of the Union and the national laws and policies to enable the youth to play a more active and robust role in creating a peaceful, prosperous, integrated, and influential Africa. And we decided to establish a working group of 10 members representing the sub-regions of African countries with a mandate of following up the progress and implementation of this declaration, compiling report and working on effectiveness in collaboration with other stakeholders and the host of this very summit. Finally, express our deep gratitude and appreciation to the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, the Youth Coalition, and others for hosting the first African Youth Summit successfully. The 1st of November 2022, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alamar Taifu, Continental Task Force Coordinator of the Summit. Actually, he spoke on behalf of the African youth, focusing on the outcomes of the 4-day summit that started 4 days ago and culminating today with a special award and recognition ceremony in the presence of His Excellency Prime Minister Dr. Abiy Ahmed of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia. At this juncture, ladies and gentlemen, let's please congratulate all African youth for making it to Addis Ababa and making this important outcome and resolution. Would you please give them a big round of applause? Honorable ladies and gentlemen, as you all know, this summit is the brainchild of His Excellency Dr. Abiy Ahmed in his quest for bridging between the past and the future. As you all know, Africa is home to a majority of population being very young. And without holding the young population, there is no leadership. In due recognition of this, His Excellency the Prime Minister has championed the cause of the African youth in the leadership and realization of the Africa we all seek. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please join me in hugely congratulating His Excellency Dr. Abiy Ahmed, Prime Minister of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, for pioneering this initiative and making it take off. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Prime Minister. As I have introduced today on this closing ceremony, we're gonna give a word by His Excellency the Prime Minister to African leaders for their lifetime achievement in leadership and mobilizing their people, and especially Africa, the African continent, in its fight against colonization and for freedom. Ladies and gentlemen, we have 14 entities, 14 leaders to recognize today, and we're gonna read first. I will present the profiles and what they have done of the 17 leaders actually, and then 9 of whom their families have made it to this summit, who will kindly and who will be honored with a special recognition award by His Excellency the Prime Minister. So allow me to present the profiles of the 17 awardees tonight, and then we'll follow that by the actual award ceremony to be hosted by His Excellency the Prime Minister. So the first one we start with is Emperor Haile Selassie I. Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia presided over the foundation of the Organization of African Unity, the precursor of the African Union, and served as its first chairman. The emperor was also a mastermind behind the Pan-Africanism movement that aims to encourage and strengthen bonds of solidarity between all people of African descent worldwide. The establishment of the Organization of African Unity, or AU, seemed impossible due to a major rift created between African leaders on how the concept of African unity should be implemented. The disagreement among leaders resulted in the creation of 2 separate groups, Monrovia and the Casablanca groups, that had opposing philosophical beliefs regarding the implementation of African unity. It was during this critical period in the continent's history that the emperor decided to intervene and work to bring the 2 groups to one. The visionary leadership of Emperor Haile Selassie I and the relentless diplomatic efforts of the then Foreign Minister of Ethiopia, Katama Yifru, directed the groups to reconcile their differences, thus ending the rift, and the OAU was established. The African Union unveiled the commemorative statue of Emperor Haile Selassie I on the premises of the African Union at the 32nd African Union Summit in Addis Ababa on the 10th of February 2019. The statue of Emperor I is an important recognition to his efforts towards Africa's liberation and unity, leading to the formation of the Organization of African Unity, OAU, in 1960. Emperor Haile Selassie not only made Addis Ababa a major center for the Organization of African Unity, His Majesty also brought Ethiopia into the League of Nations and the United Nations. Would you please give a big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, to the late Emperor Haile Selassie I of Ethiopia. His Majesty King Hassan II. His Majesty King Hassan II of Morocco, unceasing devotion to the cause of peace and unity throughout Africa was significant. His Majesty struggled to overcome the challenges of colonialism and bring prosperity for Morocco. His Majesty King Hassan II worked closely with Emperor Haile Selassie I on the cause of African peace and unity. On June the 14th, 1972, both leaders addressed the Summit for the Organization for African Unity, which King Hassan himself hosted in Rabat. Sincere apologies, honorable ladies and gentlemen. I think I now am at a better place. All right, so His Majesty King Hassan worked closely with Emperor Haile Selassie I on the cause of African peace and unity. On June the 14th, 1972, both leaders addressed the summit of the OAU, which King Hassan himself hosted in Rabat. His Majesty King Hassan's dedication to and unwavering faith in the consolidation of unity and peace of our continent need to be remembered by all Africans. The generous and typically African hospitality extended to all African leaders by the late King is yet another manifestation of the keen interest His Majesty and the government and people of Kingdom of Morocco have in strengthening the OAU. Africa remembers the life of His Majesty King Hassan II as a distinguished statesman, a man of honor, dignity, courage, and understanding. Africa will also remember King Hassan II as a Pan-Africanist and a founding father of the Organization of African Unity, and a man who genuinely believed in Africa's enduring struggle for peace, unity, and stability. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for His Majesty King Hassan II for the immense contribution. Julius Cambridge Nyerere. Julius Cambridge Nyerere was a major force behind the modern Pan-African movement and one of the founders in 1963 of the OAU. Nyerere was a key figure in African events in the 1970s. He was a strong advocate of economic and political measures in dealing with the apartheid policies of South Africa. Nyerere was chairman of a group of 5 frontline African presidents who advocated for the overthrow of white supremacy in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, South Africa, and Southwest Africa, now Namibia. He was also an ardent and militant African nationalist and an equally convinced and persuasive Pan-Africanist. He was advocating nationalism and opposing to tribalism. He consistently emphasized that the newly independent countries had to weave together a nation out of tribes and ethnicity. He did not succumb to ideology and politicization of tribe. On this, he remained steadfast throughout his political life. In a dialogue with academics in 1991, he was questioned as to why he saw tribal identities as inherently negative when he himself was a proud African. He said that Africans should come together and forge strong unity. Ladies and gentlemen, Julius Cambridge Nyerere. Ahmed Sékou Touré. Ahmed Sékou Touré was the first leader of independent Guinea and founding father of the Organization of the African Union, and best known for being an ardent supporter of the Pan-African ideals. His deeds proved no less. He has helped independence struggles in brotherly African countries and provided shelters for the needy freedom fighters. At the national level, he utterly rejected domination and pursued a policy that ensures independence in an expeditious manner. At the continental level, he was among those leaders who hoped to see a united Africa. In his memorable speech of 1963, he expressed his determination to see all African states freed from the yoke of colonialism. He will be remembered for boldly suggesting to effectively free those parts of Africa which were still under domination by our own means: political and diplomatic struggle, economic boycott of the backward colonial powers in order to achieve the objective of the liberalization or liberation. Touré's fight was determinant in the then liberation struggle, and it's still reminiscent and ever important in that Africa is yet to get rid of the evils of colonialism. Neo-colonialism, to which Touré pointed as the threat of African independence, is still true. Ladies and gentlemen, Ahmed Sékou Touré. Leopold Ségar Senghor. Leopold Sedar Senghor, one can understand from the life of Leopold Sedar Senghor that his life experience became about liberty and freedom, especially in the years forming his adulthood. His experience of colonial Africa led to his assuming the leading role in the Negritude movement, which later could also be observed in his philosophical approach. He had incredible Pan-African passion and fought for the unity of Africa, but few knew the right approach that would lead to the continued existence of their independent nations as well as the whole continent. The continent was facing foes that yielded all the might. Here came Senghor's wit. Senghor instituted a system in tune with the world order at a time which would allow a political unity to constitute and then grow. This happened in his country, and with a middleman gifted to steer political differences aside in Ethiopia, that idea bore fruits of a gradually uniting continent. For this, we owe Senghor and his like-minded personalities of the day a very great deal. He once said, and I quote, "It is that community of culture which I call Africanness. I would define it as the sum total of African civilized values." End of quote. Where it appears in its Arab-Berber aspect or its African Negro aspect, Africanness always shows the same characteristics of passion in feelings and vigor in expression. Ladies and gentlemen, Leopold Sedar Senghor of Senegal. Jomo Kenyatta. Jomo Kenyatta was Kenya's first president and one of the forerunners of the Pan-African nationalists. He engaged in the African nationalist movements against the occupation of African lands by colonialists. He collaborated with other prominent African figures to spread the values and instilled the distinct political movement of Pan-Africanism to the continent and people of African descent in the diaspora. At the earlier stage, as part of his struggle against colonial rule, he fought with the British under the banner of Mau Mau movement and traveled to London to denounce the colonialist policy over Africa. 1929 and his consecutive trips to London focused on airing discontent of Africans over the policy and calling for protection of rights of Africans. Jomo Kenyatta was one of the founding fathers of the OAU alongside leaders such as Emperor Haile Selassie I, Julius Nyerere, Kwame Nkrumah, and Gamal Abdel Nasser. He laid the foundations for the Kenyan African National Union, KANU, a party that ruled Kenya for almost 40 years. Ladies and gentlemen, Jomo Kenyatta. Gamal Abdel Nasser. President Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt, along with President Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, rose to international prominence as leaders and visionaries who were able to achieve political independence in their respective home countries while attempting to shape a destiny for Africa that did not involve Western imperialism. For Nasser's part, he first secured independence for Egypt, then turned his attention to the Middle East, but soon became active in the politics of sub-Saharan Africa. Nasser's ventures into sub-Saharan Africa during the period of decolonization on the continent and his aspirations for Africa were equally a part of his political agenda that came to be known as Nasserism. He considered Egypt's fate tied to Africa just as much as it was tied to the Middle East. Nasser's involvement in the struggle for Africa's freedom was part of the active role Africans played in their quest for independence from European colonizers. Many African leaders during his time were as prominent and as astute as Nasser and were committed to establishing an anti-imperialist continent while developing modern African states based on the principles of Pan-Africanism. While this occurred, new countries began to enter Africa, and it became up to the African heads of state to determine how much involvement they wanted from these outsiders and at what cost. Ladies and gentlemen, Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt. Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah spearheaded the Gold Coast's independence movement and its transformation into modern-day Ghana. He inspired subsequent independence movements throughout Africa. He formed the Convention Party, People's Party, which achieved rapid success through its unprecedented appeal to the common voter. He became Ghana's first post-independence prime minister in 1952 and later its first president. The first African statesman to achieve world recognition was Kwame Nkrumah, who ruled Ghana from 1909 to 1972, who became president of the new Republic of Ghana in 1960. Ghanaians approved a new constitution and elected Nkrumah president. His administration was primarily socialist as well as nationalist, and he developed a strong national education system and promoted a Pan-Africanist culture. Under Nkrumah, Ghana played a leading role in African international relations during the decolonization period. His greatest achievement was to win the right of black peoples in Africa to have a vote and to determine their own destiny. He turned a dream of liberation into a political reality. He was a leader of Ghana who urged Africa to shed the colonial yoke and who inspired black people everywhere to seek their freedom. In Nkrumah's argument, Pan-African unity was one of the basic pillars of his ideology. Ladies and gentlemen, Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana. Kenneth David Kaunda. Kenneth David Kaunda was a founding father of the Republic of Zambia, who served as the first president of Zambia from 1964 to 1991. He was a forefront of the struggle for independence from British rule. He wants the continent to strengthen regional integration and keep tabs on Pan-Africanism to stimulate progress and development. Kenneth David Kaunda maintained hope for the continent with the young people at the helm, saying success is assured if they continued in their quest to build Africa. He, together with his compatriots, led a struggle against African colonization. In Zambia, he is remembered for uniting over 73 tribes using the One Zambia, One Nation motto, which he coined himself, and being a selfless, people-centered leader. In Africa, he is remembered for supporting African liberation. He hosted several liberation movements when Zambia got independence. As a young professional, when he was in Tanzania, he was influenced by the work of President Julius Nyerere, who was spearheading particularly Pan-Africanism. This led him to think about African liberation and African ways of thinking and doing things. The end result was that he became a nationalist and Pan-Africanist. Ladies and gentlemen, Kenneth David Kaunda. Nelson Mandela. Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, forgive me for that, was a South African anti-apartheid activist who served as the first president of South Africa from 1994 to 1999. He was the country's first black head of state and the first elected in a fully representative democratic election. Madiba's legacy includes the establishment of a constitutional democracy in South Africa and the replication of these values and ideals across Africa. He will be remembered as an ardent protagonist of Pan-Africanism who went out of his way to help solve some of Africa's most devastating conflicts. Nelson Mandela never wavered in his devotion to democracy, equality, and learning. Despite terrible provocation, he never answered racism with racism. His life is an inspiration to all who are oppressed and deprived, and to all who are opposed to oppression and deprivation. Madiba inspired South Africa, Africa, and the world at large with his vision of a democratic society free of racism and prejudice. He encouraged tolerance and forgiveness and helped us to imagine a future where the most vulnerable and marginalized people would be free from fear and war. Nelson Mandela transcended South Africa and Africa. He was eventually a moral compass for the world, an international figure whose legacy will continue to provide inspiration for generations to come. Ladies and gentlemen, Nelson Mandela of South Africa. Robert Gabriel Mugabe. Robert Gabriel Mugabe was a Zimbabwean revolutionary and politician who served as Prime Minister of Zimbabwe from 1980 to 1987, and then a president from 1987 to 2017. He was praised as a revolutionary hero of the African liberation struggle who helped free Zimbabwe from British colonialism, imperialism, and white minority rule. Mugabe's role as a freedom fighter in a war that liberated Zimbabwe and also helped in the fight against apartheid in South Africa was never in doubt. Mugabe was an icon of liberation, a Pan-Africanist who dedicated his life to the emancipation and empowerment of his people. His contribution to the history of his nation and continent will never be forgotten. Mugabe was also a staunch Pan-Africanist, like Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere of Tanzania, DRC's Patrice Lumumba, and Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi, who all believed African resources were for Africans only and not for exploitation and the benefits of colonial masters. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert Gabriel Mugabe. Abubakar Tafawa Balewa. Abubakar Tafawa Balewa was a Nigerian politician and the only Prime Minister of an independent Nigeria. Originally a trained teacher, he became a vocal representative of the majority interests as one of the few educated Nigerians of his time. He was also an international statesman, widely respected across the African continent as one of the leaders who encouraged the formation of the Organization of African Unity, or AU. Prime Minister Balewa helped shape early foreign policy of Nigeria in line with Pan-Africanism. In 1960, he was instrumental in negotiating a settlement between factions in the Congo Civil War. He led his government in a vocal protest of the Sharpeville massacre in South Africa and attempted unsuccessfully to persuade other British Commonwealth nations to expel South Africa because of its apartheid policies. Balewa also was one of the African leaders who encouraged the formation of the Organization of African Unity, or AU. He was an important leader in the formation of the Organization of African Unity and creating a cooperative relationship with French-speaking African countries. Ladies and gentlemen, Abubakar Tafawa Balewa. Modibo Keita. Mr. Keita favored a more active economic union integration that would result in a powerful continent with a deciding seat at the world stage. To that end, Keita and his fellow countrymen agreed to the West African Union suggested by the French and agreed to as well by the Senegalese. Keita's acceptance emanated from the need to liberate the national and continental economies and decree an all-out independence. Keita proved to be a strong voice in the groups that he has ascribing to, and later in the Union, bringing together different voices for a common goal. He indeed was a helping hand to the mediators in bringing the Union to fruition. It was also important that he was a proponent to a non-violent territorial integrity of the continent. This saved us time and lives that would have been otherwise lost to no cause. The threats that we face today were clearly pointed out then by Keita. The need for cooperation in the fields of defense and security shows that Keita had the agency to foretell what the future held if the continent remained divided. Ladies and gentlemen, Modibo Keita. William V.S. Tubman. William Tubman's presidency was marked by great change in the economy, politics, and social environment of Liberia and Africa as a whole. During the decolonization era, President Tubman enjoyed great international stature as one of Africa's leading statesmen. His presidency coincided with Africa's dramatic transition from a continent of colonies to a continent of independent states. In 1944, as Tubman began his first term as president, only 4 independent states existed in Africa: Egypt, Ethiopia, South Africa, and Liberia. By the time of his death in 1971, there were 40 independent African states. Tubman believed in a future determined through consultations among Africa's leaders, and he favored an organization that featured African political cooperation and consultation among its leaders, rather than the continental government model. A series of conferences and smaller meetings and behind-the-scenes talks ensured to form African organization, and Tubman was active in all these. On May the 25th, 1963, 33 independent African countries signed the Charter for the Organization of African Unity, OAU, in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Liberian President Tubman and his Secretary of State, Rudolph Grimes, played key roles in drafting and negotiating the final document. Ladies and gentlemen, William V.S. Tubman. Ahmed Ben Bella. President Ben Bella devoted most of his life to fighting for the liberation of his country, for which he made huge sacrifices. He embarked very early upon in the anti-colonial struggle, which culminated in the independence of Algeria in July 1962. In the vision of President Ahmed Ben Bella, the liberation of Algeria could not be completed so long as the entire continent was not also freed from the yoke of foreign and racial domination. Accordingly, during the founding summit of the Organization of the African Unity, OAU, in Addis Ababa in May 1963, he urged his African peers to die a little or even completely to complete the decolonization agenda and the struggle against apartheid and racial discrimination. In this context, he was a staunch supporter of African unity, driven as he was by the conviction that without unity, Africa would not be able to meet the challenge of recovering her freedom and dignity. Former President Ben Bella's commitment to the Pan-African cause never abated. Thus, in 2007, he accepted the request of Mr. Alpha Omar Konare, then chairperson of the Commission, to head the AU Panel of the Wise, one of the pillars of the African peace and security architecture, which is notably mandated to support conflict prevention efforts on the continent. Ladies and gentlemen, President Ahmed Ben Bella. Flexi Houphouët Boigny. For over 3 decades after it attained independence in 1960, Côte d'Ivoire enjoyed political stability and relative socio-economic prosperity under its founding leader, President Félix Houphouët Boigny. As head of state in Francophone Africa's country, the late President Houphouët Boigny exerted a significant influence in the neighboring Francophone countries, so much so that he initiated profound political change in his region. Félix Boigny symbolized freedom for his country in the time of oppression and marginalization. Boigny's conception of African unity prevailed during his time. For him, this unity must be progressive, sub-regional, and finally continental. OAU, today AU, respectful of national sovereignties, concerned with concrete achievements rather than rushed supernatural political constructions. Unlike many African leaders who immediately demanded independence, Mr. Boigny wished for a careful transition. According to him, political independence without economic independence was worthless. He also invited Nkrumah to meet up with him in 10 years to see which one of the two had chosen the best approach towards independence. Throughout his life, he played a significant role in politics and the decolonization of Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, Félix Houphouët Boigny. Samora Machel. Samora Moises Machel was a Pan-African freedom fighter and first leader of independent Mozambique. Samora Machel was a visionary leader who looked beyond the suffering of the day, who saw the opportunity for the future of a free Africa with a new mentality. He was against neo-colonialism. He was, or as he vowed, to continue fighting it in independent Mozambique to ensure complete freedom and equality for all his countrymen and Africa. Africa. He said, and I quote, "Colonialism is a crime against humanity. There is no humane colonialism. There is no democratic colonialism. There is no non-exploitative colonialism." End of quote. Samora Machel unconditionally welcomed liberation fighters in Mozambique and dedicated his life to the complete emancipation of Southern Africa. He inspired many fellow Africans to build a society free of prejudice, racism, patriarchy, and exploitation. Samora Moises Machel, often referred to as the Son of Africa, dedicated his life to attaining independence, African unity, peace, and economic freedom. The life of this revolutionary and Pan-African leader was curtailed, and Africa once again lost an opportunity for the emancipation of the African continent from economic bondage. Africa will live to mourn and remember this anti-imperialist and revolutionalist as one of the great Pan-African leaders. Ladies and gentlemen, Samora Machel. Another huge round of applause for all former leaders who will be honored today here. Thank you very much. We'll now go on to the next program, which is the actual award ceremony to be accorded by His Excellency, the Guest of Honor, the Prime Minister of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia. I will now call upon His Excellency Dr. Ali Musume, Minister for Democratic System Building at the Office of the Prime Minister, to moderate the award ceremony.
Thank you. Excellency Dr. Abiy Ahmed, Prime Minister of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, Honorable Speakers, Excellency Deputy Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister, Ato Demeke Mokonnin, Excellency Adam Farah, Vice President, Prosperity Party, former African heads of state and governments, Excellency Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Excellency Mayor of Addis Ababa, Excellencies Ministers, Excellencies African Union Commission Commissioners, Excellencies Ambassadors, families of late Pan-Africanist leaders, participants of Pan-African Youth Summit, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. At this juncture, it is an honor and a privilege to me to congratulate you all for the successful accomplishment of the first Pan-Africanist Youth Summit organized with a theme, Integrated African at the Bridge of His Excellency Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, held from October 29th to November 1, 2022, here in the capital city of Africa, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. This summit, which gathered African prospective leaders from 42 African countries, have deliberated on the legacy of our forefathers who stood firm for the unity of the continent and sacrificed their lives struggling for the liberation of Africa. Participant African youths have also charted out the way forward for the upholding this Pan-Africanism spirit at this critical juncture to determine the fate of our mother continent. I now invite His Excellency Prime Minister of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia and the Peace Roulette, Dr. Abiy Ahmed, to the podium for handovering the award and closing remark. Please, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, the Guest of Honor, Prime Minister Dr. Abiy Ahmed of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, once again for joining us for this grand award ceremony. Thank you all very much. You may be seated. So among the 17 former leaders who were duly introduced, we'll now give award to the 9 families of the 9 who have made it to join us here dedicating their time and effort to receive the award from His Excellency, the Guest of Honor. The first in the list, Emperor Haile Selassie I, families of Emperor Haile Selassie I. Thank you very much. Lifetime Achievement Award on this Youth Leadership Summit. As it is closing here in Addis Ababa, we duly recognize and honor former leaders who have fought for Pan-African causes. Ladies and gentlemen, Emperor Haile Selassie I, once again. His Majesty King Hassan II, families of His Majesty King Hassan II, one of the forefathers who stood by the Pan-African movement, who have emancipated Africa from the yoke of colonization. His Majesty King Hassan II. Julius Kambaj Nyerere, families of Julius Kambaj Nyerere. Thanks to these forefathers, Africa is on the rise, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the great foundation work they have laid down for us for fighting for the cause of Africa through a struggle and movement called Pan-Africanism. Julius Kambaj Nyerere, a big round of applause. Thank you very much, madam. Kenneth David Kaunda. Family of Kenneth David Kaunda. Again, one of the prominent figures, the forefathers of Africa, who were instrumental in establishing the then Organization of African Unity and in laying down the foundation for us to stand where we are today. Would you please give a big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, Kenneth David Kaunda. Ahmed Sékou Touré. Ahmed Sékou Touré. Again, another household name in the Pan-African movement in the continent of Africa, today represented by a young man and his family. What a great connection between the past and the present, ladies and gentlemen, which is a very important theme of this continental event or summit. Ahmed Sékou Touré. Leopold Sédar Senghor. Leopold Sédar Senghor. Families of Leopold Sédar Senghor, ladies and gentlemen. Again, another very prominent figure in the establishment of the Organization for African Unity, one of our forefathers in the struggle for emancipation of Africa. Leopold Sédar Senghor. We continue to honor our forefathers. We continue to give due regard and respect to those fathers who had the vision at a time when it was all dark, ladies and gentlemen. Because of them, we stand free today. A big round of applause again, ladies and gentlemen. Leopold Sédar Senghor. Flexi Hofet Boigny. Flexi Hofet Boigny. My apologies if there is any mispronunciation, ladies and gentlemen. Again, a great family represented by a young lady. Ladies and gentlemen, again, Africa is not just about men, it's also about women, it's also about gender equality, it's also about being equal. Pan-Africanism is a cause for equality in all respects. Thanks to all those forefathers who made it possible for us to stand here today. Modibo Keita. Modibo Keita, family of Modibo Keita, coming forward in a beautiful Pan-African attire, as you can see, representing African culture, African proud tradition, and we are moreover proud of the work they have done to lay down the foundation of African unity as we stand today. Modibo Keita, thank you very much. And Robert Gabriel Mugabe, ladies and gentlemen. Robert Gabriel Mugabe, another very prominent name, another huge household when it comes to Africa, when it comes to Pan-Africanism, when it comes to emancipating Africa from the yoke of colonization. Robert Gabriel Mugabe. We are proud of the family. We are proud of all those who have made it possible for us to be proud of Africans today. We are proud Africans because of the foundation that they laid for us, ladies and gentlemen. A big round of applause. Robert Gabriel Mugabe. So one huge round of applause to all who have made it to join us here in Addis Ababa, representing the families of all those forefathers, 9 of whom have been represented by their families today. The remaining will be addressed through diplomatic channels, through their embassies in Addis Ababa. Honorable ladies and gentlemen, finally, it's a great pleasure, a unique privilege for me to invite His Excellency, the guest of honor, Dr. Abiy Ahmed, Prime Minister of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, to make some closing remarks.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Then I still Honorable Speakers, African Union Commission Commissioners, former African heads of state and government, families of late leaders, African prospect leaders, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. It brings me joy to address you this afternoon because meeting young African leaders gives me big hope for this continent and for upcoming generation. Young African leaders, Africa's journey to prosperity is inevitable. Many things are working in Africa's favor. By 2030, 40% of global youth will be African. The next generation of African and global leaders is sitting among us, you and you. Africa's economic growth rate has ticked upward since the dawn of the new millennium. We are leapfrogging into the future at an accelerating rate. Startups, creative individuals, and innovations are flourishing in Africa. Technologies from Africa are spreading across the continent and beyond, tackling some of the continent's biggest challenges with homegrown technologies. Africa is embracing the fourth industrial revolution. We recently held the Pan-African Artificial Intelligence Conference and developed strategies for achieving sustainable development through harnessing the power of emerging technologies. Continuing the favorable economic trajectory requires structural transformation of our economies. Diversifying production, increasing trade and competitiveness, and shifting from our role as producer of raw materials to higher value-added production by accelerating industrialization will create prosperous nations. African resources are abundant. We hold a considerable proportion of the world's natural resources, both renewable and non-renewable. Our assets are more than our liabilities. However, our economic sovereignty has been caught in a vicious cycle of lack, and our state autonomy has been vulnerable to interference. Lack of care, malnutrition, and unemployment have been challenging for years. We need to be innovative and skilled in meeting globalization challenges. African governments are charting development pathways. For instance, Ethiopia reduced poverty, increased literacy, and now has started paving the way to ensure food sovereignty. Through Green Legacy, Ethiopia is pursuing self-reliance and green diplomacy. Green Legacy focuses on boosting afforestation, sequestering carbon from the atmosphere, improving the livelihoods of citizens, and promoting green behavior. I invite you all to work together to forge a new system of green development and green behavior. Green is not only beautiful, but also grounded and stable. We need grounded leaders and a stable system in our continent, Africa. Another self-reliance initiative we are pursuing is our wheat production program. As a result, the country is on track to begin exporting wheat to our neighbors. Young leaders, I dare you to reimagine your future, our future, Africa's future. Reimagine our future by shaping how the world perceives Africa. World views are a driver for transformation and prosperity. What we speak to Africa echoes back. Let us no longer talk of deprivation and lack, but abundance, success, and hope. Radiating a positive energy is very important for upcoming generation. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let's claim our achievements. We see many young African entrepreneurs creating transformative solutions and continuing to be innovative in crucial sectors relevant to our continent. We need to nurture innovation and support innovators. Ethiopia has just inaugurated the first talent school to train young people on how to create, run, and manage businesses so that their creativity and efforts will bear fruit that will not only improve their lives but also benefit the entire region's economic gains. After all, education's utility is to anticipate and solve legitimate dilemmas on the ground and thus build skills beyond the classroom. Skills development is essential for increased productivity, inclusive economic growth, and poverty reduction. Innovation is a core tenet in Ethiopia. We have recently inaugurated the first science museum where more than 500,000 visitors were awed and inspired by science. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as Africans, we must stay on the path that our forefathers paved. Remarkable Pan-Africanists founded the OAU in 1963 to promote unity and solidarity among West African states, enable development and safeguard our continent's sovereignty and territorial integrity. This is an important reminder for you to be able to carry on the responsibilities set by the Africa Union Agenda 2063. I want to assure you that Ethiopia is highly committed to working with the Africa Union to implement the Youth Summit decisions. I warmly congratulate former leaders and the families of the founders of the OAU for the well-deserved special award. Thank you for coming home. Thank you for coming home to inaugurate the first African Youth Leaders Conference. I declare the first Africa Youth Leaders Summit officially closed. I thank you and God bless you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The guest of honor, Your Excellency, Dr. Abiy Ahmed, Prime Minister of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, for officially declaring this important continental summit closed. And we also join hands in congratulating His Excellency, the guest of honor, His Excellency Prime Minister Dr. Abiy Ahmed, in making this happen as the first edition of the Africa Youth Leaders Summit. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please another round of congratulations to His Excellency Dr. Abiy Ahmed. Thank you very much. Earlier on the presentation of the former leaders who we recognized and honored with a special award ceremony on the Pan-Africanism Lifetime Achievement, we sincerely apologize for a mix-up in the picture and a bit of presentation of their background. That was made in a bid to make it perfect, more perfect. But apologies that this is the first edition of this international forum. Next time, we'll make it even more than perfect. Would you accept our apologies? Thank you very much. So in recognition of the different stakeholders of this continental forum, we'll now have His Excellency, the guest of honor, take a group photo with different groups of people who I will be introducing to come forward on the stage with His Excellency, the guest of honor, to have a picture, a memorial picture on this August occasion. Your Excellency, the floor is yours to have a group photo with the following groups. The first group to take a group photo with Excellency the guest of honor is the guest of honors, former leaders invited to this event. Former leaders, would you please come?
ተመልካቾቻችን የኢትዮጵያ ቴሌቪዥንን እየተከታተላችሁ ነው የምትገኙት። የቀጥታ ስርጭቱን ከዚህ ከአፍሪካ ኢኮኖሚ ኮሚሽን የአፍሪካ ወጣቶች ጉባኤ በተለይም የአህጉሪቱ የመጪው መሪዎች የመጪው ዘመን መሪዎችን በተመለከተ ጠቅላይ ሚኒስትር አብይ አህመድ እዚህ የጉባኤው ማጠናቀቂያ ላይ ተገኝተው የሽልማት መርሃ ግብር አከናውነዋል። በተለይም ለፓን አፍሪካኒዝም ትልቅ አስተዋጽኦ ያደረጉ ለአፍሪካ ነጻነት ከአፍሪካ ነጻ ከሆነችም በኋላ ደግሞ እንዴት መቀጠል መቻል አለባት የሚለውን ፖለቲካዊ የሆኑ ኢኮኖሚያዊ የሆኑና ማህበራዊ የሆኑ መፍትሄዎችን ያስቀመጡ ጥቁር የአፍሪካ አባቶችን የተመረኮዙ እነዛንም ደግሞ ተንተርሶ እዚህ በአፍሪካ የወጣቶች ጉባኤ ላይ የተጋበዙ የቀደምት የፓን አፍሪካኒዝም ማቀንቃኝ አባት የነበሩ ወገኖችን ቤተዘመዶችን እና ቤተሰቦችን የተጋበዙትን ለነዛ የሽልማት ስነ ስርዓት አከናውነዋል ማለት ነው ጠቅላይ ሚኒስትር አብይ አህመድ። ያን ተከትሎም ያስተላለፉት መልእክት አለ። አጠቃላይ ሁኔታውን እንግዲህ በተወሰነ መልኩ ለእናንተ ለተመልካቾቻችን ዳሰሳ ያረጋን እንዘልቃለን።
እንግዲህ የመጪው ጊዜ የአፍሪካ መሪዎች ጉባኤ እንግዲህ ዛሬ መቋጫውን አግኝቷል። በጠቅላይ ሚኒስትር አብይ አህመድ አነሳሽነት የመጣ ጉባኤ ነበረ። እንግዲህ ይሄ ጉባኤ ለ4 ቀናት ተካሂዶ ዛሬ በአፍሪካ ኢኮኖሚ ኮሚሽን መሰብሰቢያ አዳራሽ ነው እንግዲህ ማጠቃለያ መርሃ ግብር የተካሄደው። እንግዲህ ሮዛ ቀደም ብለሽ ስታነሺው እንደነበረው ወደ 17 የሚሆኑ የቀድሞ የአፍሪካ መሪዎች እንግዲህ በተለይ የፓን አፍሪካኒዝምን እንቅስቃሴ ሂሳቢዎችን የበለጠ በማጠናከር ረገድ አፍሪካውያን አንድ እንዲሆኑ በመስራት ረገድ እንግዲህ ያበረከቱ ትልቅ አስተዋጽኦ እንደነበር ነው በመድረኩ የተገለጸው። ከነዚህ መካከል እንግዲህ ወደ 9 የሚሆኑት የአፍሪካ መሪዎች ቤተሰቦቻቸው በዚህ ጉባኤ የመጨረሻ ማጠቃለያ መርሃ ግብር ላይ ተገኝተው ነበር። በአጠቃላይ እንግዲህ ለሁሉም የሽልማት ስነ ስርዓቱ እንግዲህ በአብይ አህመድ አማካኝነት ሽልማት ተበርክቶላቸዋል ለቤተሰቦቹ ማለት ነው። 9 ቤተሰቦች ተገኝተው ከጠቅላይ ሚኒስትር አብይ አህመድ ሽልማቱን ሲረከቡ፣ ሌሎቹ ግን ቀሪዎቹ ወደ 8 የሚሆኑት የቀድሞ መሪዎች ቤተሰቦች ደግሞ በኤምባሲ አማካኝነት እንደሚደርሳቸው ነው የተገለጸው። እንግዲህ የአፍሪካ አንድነትን በማጠናከር መንገድ ከዚያ ባለፈ እንግዲህ የአፍሪካ አንድነት ድርጅት ያሁን የአፍሪካ ህብረት እንዲመሰረት ትልቅ ሚና የተጫወቱ መሪዎች ነበሩ። ጥቁር ህዝቦች እንግዲህ በርካታ የጭቆና ቀንበሮች ተጭኗቸው ነበር። ከዛ እንዲላቀቁ በማድረግ ረገድ አፄ ኃይለ ሥላሴ ትልቁ ሚና ተጫውተዋል። እንግዲህ የቀድሞው የኢትዮጵያ መሪ ማለት ነው። እሳቸው ቤተሰቦችም ተገኝተው ይሄንን የተቀበሉ ነበር። እንግዲህ ጠቅላይ ሚኒስትር አብይ አህመድ በዚህ ማጠቃለያ መርሃ ግብር ላይ ንግግርም አድርገው ነበር። ከነዚያ መካከል አንዱ ያነሱት በተለይ የኢትዮጵያ ያለፈችባቸው መንገዶች አንዱ ከስኬት ጋር ተያይዞ ቅድም ስናነሳው እንደነበረው የአረንጓዴ መርሃ ግብሩ ትልቅ ስኬት ነው። ወደ ጎረቤት ሀገራትም በአረንጓዴ ዲፕሎማሲ አማካኝነት እየተሻገረ ያለና ሌሎች አፍሪካውያንም ይሄንን ተምሳሌት ተከትለው እንዲሄዱ መልእክት ያስተላለፉበት ነበር እንችላለን። እንግዲህ አፍሪካ በተለይ ከራሷን ከምግብ ከመመገብ አልፋ ለሌሎችም መትረፍ የምትችል አህጉር ነች። ብዙ ህዝብ ያላት ብዙ የተፈጥሮ ሀብት ያላት አህጉር እንደሆነች ነው የተናገሩት። ነገር ግን እዚህ ላይ በርካታ ስራዎች መስራት ይጠበቃል። እንደ ኢትዮጵያ ግን በተለይ የበጋ ስንዴን ማስታወስ እንችላለን። በርካታ ስራዎች እየተሰሩበት ያለ ከጥቂት ዓመታት የተሰራበት መጥቶ አሁን ላይ በጣም በርካታ ሚሊዮን ኩንታሎችን ማግኘት የተቻለበት ነበርና ይህንን ደግሞ በማስፋት ለሌሎች ለጎረቤት ሀገራቶችንም የስንዴ ልማት ምርትን ወደ እነሱ ማጋባት ላይ ሰፊ ስራዎች እንደሚሰሩም የጠቀሱበት ነበር። በርካታ መልእክቶችንም አስተላልፈዋል ጠቅላይ ሚኒስትሩ።
እንግዲህ እንደተባለው ጠቅላይ ሚኒስትር አብይ አህመድ በዚህ በመዝጊያ ስነ ስርዓቱ ላይ ባደረጉት ንግግር እናንተ ቀጣይ የአፍሪካ መሪዎች ናችሁ፣ ምክንያቱም አፍሪካውያን አሁን ላይ 70% ያህል ወጣቶች ናቸው። በቀጣይ ጥቂት ዓመታት ውስጥ ደግሞ ከዛም የላቀ በመቶኛ ሊቀመጥ የሚችል የወጣት ቁጥር በአፍሪካ ይኖራል። ይህ ወጣት አቅም አለው። ይህ ወጣት የአፍሪካን መጻኢ ዕጣ ፈንታ ለመቀየር ትልቅ እድል ያለውም ጭምር ነው። ይህንን አጠናክሮ ባንድ ላይ በጋራ መስራት ከቻለን ደግሞ አፍሪካን ለመቀየር ሰፊ እድሎች እንዳሉ የሚያስቀምጡ ሀሳቦችን ነው ያነሱት። በተለይ አፍሪካ ኢኖቬሽንና ቴክኖሎጂ ላይ ትኩረት አድርጋ ልትሰራ እንደሚገባት እና አሁን ላይ የዓለም አቀፍ ሁኔታዎችም ያንን እያመላከቱ ነው ያሉት። የበለጠ በቴክኖሎጂ የታገዘ የበለጠ በኢኖቬሽንና በስራ ፈጠራ የታገዘ አይነት ሂደቶችንና ክሬቲቪቲ ብለን የምናነሳው ይህን አዲስ ነገርን የመፍጠር ያንን የማልማት ለማህበረሰብ ጥቅም የመዋል ሂደቶች ላይ አፍሪካውያን በስፋት ሊሰሩ ይገባል። አሁን ዓለም እየተራመደ ያለው ወደዛ ነው። ስለዚህ አፍሪካውያኖች የሚገጥማቸውን ችግሮች ደግሞ ከዛ ጋር በተያያዙ ሀሳቦች መመለስ ተገቢ ነው በሚል አንስቷል። ኢትዮጵያ የጀመረቻቸው ሂደቶች አሉ። በተለይም ወጣቶች ታዳጊ ልጆች የራሳቸውን የፈጠራ የራሳቸው ፍላጎት ማንጸባረቂያ የሚያደርጉ ማዕከላትን በማቋቋም ጭምር ወደ ሳይንስ የበለጠ እንዲጠጉ የማድረግ ስራዎች እየተሰሩ ስለመሆናቸው ጠቁመዋል። የሳይንስ ሙዚየም በቅርቡ ተመርቆ እንግዲህ በርካታ ከሳይንስ ጋር የተገናኙ ከፈጠራ ጋር የተገናኙ ስራዎች ከቴክኖሎጂ ጋር የተገናኙ ስራዎች እንደሚሰሩበት ይታወቃልና እንደዚህ አይነት ልማቶች ላይ አፍሪካውያን በርተው ሊገቡ እንደሚገባ ያነሱበት ሂደት አለ። ከዛ ውጪ እንችላለን የሚለውን ስሜትም ማምጣት ተገቢነት እንዳለው አንስተዋል። አፍሪካውያኖች በበርካታ ችግሮች ውስጥ ብንሆንም ችለን ያንን ሂደት መሄድ የምንችልባቸው እድሎች እንዳሉ መገንዘብና ለዛ ደግሞ መትጋት የሚገባ ጉዳይ እንደሆነ ምን ያነሱት። ከዛ ውጪ የአፍሪካን እንግዲህ ከ2063 አጀንዳ መሳካት ጋር በተገናኘ አፍሪካ በጋራ ሲነሱ እንደሚባለው የፓን አፍሪካኒዝም እንቅስቃሴ እንደሚታወቀው ቀደምት የነበሩ አባቶች አፍሪካ በፖለቲካም አንድ መሆን ይገባታል የሚል ሀሳቦችን የያዙ ሌሎች ደግሞ በሂደት ከኢኮኖሚው አንድነት ይቀድምና ከዛ በኋላ ወደ ፖለቲካ አንድነቱን እንመጣለን የሚሉ ሀሳቦች ተነስተው በብዙ ክርክር አልፈው አሁን ላይ በሂደት አፍሪካ ወደ ፖለቲካ አንድነት ላይ ያመጣት የሚችል ኢኮኖሚ ትስስርን መስራት አለባት የሚለው ብዙ ገዢ የሆነ ጉዳይ ሆኖ በዛ መቀጠሉ ይታወቃልና ይህንን ለማሳካት ኢትዮጵያም እንግዲህ ከቀጠናው ሀገራት ጋር በተለያየ መልኩ እርስ በርስ ግንኙነቶችን የኢኮኖሚ ግንኙነቶችን መጀመሯንም እንደዚሁ ጠቁሟል። ይህ ነገር ተበራቶ በመላው አፍሪካ እንግዲህ የመጣ ሊሆን ይገባል የሚል ነገር ተነስቷል። ቀደም ሲልም እንደምናስታውሰው እነ ኔፓድ እነ የቀጠናዊ ትስስሮች ከዚህ ጋር ከኢኮኖሚ ትስስር ጋር የተሻለ ድል ሊፈጥሩ የሚችሉ አደረጃጀቶች እንደነበረም ሲጠቀስ ነበር።
አዎ በተለይ ደግሞ ዓለም አፍሪካን የሚመለከትበት የተንሸዋረረ ኃይል እንዲቀየር ለማድረግ ወጣቶች ትልቅ ሚና ይጠበቅባቸዋል። እዚህ የተገኛችሁ በጉባኤው ላይ የተሳተፋችሁ ወጣቶች ደግሞ ቀጣይ የዚችን አህጉር ከፍታ ወደ ማማ እንድትወጣ የምታደርጉ ናችሁና በትብብር መስራት ይጠበቃል። ኢትዮጵያ ደግሞ ለዚህ ቁርጠኛ ናት። አብራችሁ ሁል ጊዜ ትሰራለች። የቀደመው አባቶቻችን የፓን አፍሪካኒዝም እንቅስቃሴ ሂሳቢዎች የበለጠ ማጠናከር ያስፈልገናል። ለዚህ ደግሞ ኢትዮጵያ መቼም ቢሆን ለአፍሪካ ብቻዋን ማደግ ብቻዋን መበልጸግ ሳይሆን ሁሌ ከጎናችሁ ናችሁ የሚል መልእክቶችን አስተላልፏል። እንግዲህ ቀደም ባሉት ጊዜያት ማለት ነው በተለይ አፍሪካውያን ተከፋፍለው በነበሩበት ጊዜ የካዛብላንካና የሞኖሮቪያ ግሩፕ ተብሎ ሁለቱም የፖለቲካና የኢኮኖሚ አፍሪካ ራሷን እንድትችል ለማድረግ ነገር ግን አካሄዳቸው የተለየ በመሆኑ ያንን እናስታውሳለን። አፄ ኃይለ ሥላሴ ደግሞ እሱን ልዩነቶች በማጥበብ አዲስ አበባ ላይ በተካሄደው ጉባኤ ማለት ነው 32 የአፍሪካ ሀገራት የአፍሪካ አንድነት ድርጅት የበፊቱን ያሁን የአፍሪካ ህብረት መመስረት የቻለች ቀደምት ራሷን ጠብቃ በነጻነት ያቆየች ሀገር ነችና እንግዲህ በዚህ ጉባኤ ላይ ሮዛ በተለይ ወጣቶች በነበራቸው ቆይታ የነበረውን የአዘጋጅ ኮሚቴ አስተባባሪው አለማየሁ እንደዚሁ ገለጻ አድርገው ነበረ። በዚያ ላይ ወጣቶች በጋራ ተባብረው እንደሚሰሩ በተለይ ደግሞ የአፍሪካን ገጽታ ለመቀየር በምናደርገው ርብርብ ላይ ሁላችንም አንድ ነን የሚል መልእክቶችም አስተላልፈዋል።
እንግዲህ በዛሬው ዕለት የተጠናቀቀው የአፍሪካ የወጣቶች ጉባኤ ኢትዮጵያ ለመጀመሪያ ጊዜ እንደ አህጉር ኢኒሺዬሽኑን የመጀመሪያውን ቅድመ ሁኔታ ወስዳ ያዘጋጀችው ነው። ይህ ትልቅ አንድምታ አለው። በፖለቲካውም እንደሚታወቀው በተለይ ኢትዮጵያ ለአፍሪካ ህብረት መመስረት ትልቁን የሆነ አስተዋጽኦ ያደረገች ሀገር ናት። ለጥቁር መብቶች መከበርም በመላው ዓለም ትልቅ ምልክት የሆነች ሀገር ናትና ዛሬ ደግሞ አሁን ላይ እየተረከቡ ያሉ መጪው መሪ የሆኑ አፍሪካውያን በአንድ ላይ ቁጭ ብለው ስለ ችግሮቻቸው ስለ መልካም እድሎቻቸው እንዲነጋገሩ እንዲወያዩ የተሻለ ሊቀራረቡ ሊተሳሰሩ የሚችሉባቸውን አውዶች እንዲያሰፉ ሊያደርጉ የሚችሉ እድሎችን በመፍጠር ረገድ ብዙ ርቀት እንደሄደች የሚያመላክት ነው። ይህ ብቻ አይደለም። ከሀገሪቱ እያገኘች ያለችው ስኬት አለ። እነዚህ ስኬቶች ደግሞ በተግባር ሌሎች ሀገራት ወስደው እንደ ተሞክሮ ሊይዙት ሊቀምሩት የሚገባው ጉዳይ እንደሆነም የተመላከተበት ነው። በርካቶቹ በዚህ ቆይታቸው እጅግ ደስተኛ እንደነበሩ ጠቅሰውልናል። ከዛ ባለፈ በሀገሪቱ የተከወኑ ያሉ የተለያዩ የልማት ስራዎችንም የጎበኙበት ከዛም ልምድ የቀሰሙበት እንደሆነም እንደዚሁ በተለያዩ ጊዜ ከኛ ጋር ከኢትዮጵያ ቴሌቪዥን ጋዜጠኞች ጋር በነበራቸው ቆይታ ሲጠቅሱ እንደነበረ ይታወቃል። ይህ ሂደት እንግዲህ ኢትዮጵያ ጀምረዋለች። ይህ ሂደት መቀጠል መቻል አለበት። ስለዚህ የአፍሪካ ወጣቶች አሁንም ተሳስረው ሊቀጥሉ የሚችሉባቸው እድሎችን በመፍጠር ረገድና 2063 ላይ የተቀመጠውን የወጣቶችን ሚና በአፍሪካ የማሳደግ የወጣቶችን ተሳትፎ የበለጠ እንዲጨምር የማድረግና አሁን አፍሪካ እንደ አፍሪካ በተለይም በፖለቲካ ሽግግር ወቅት የሚታዩባት ችግሮች በኢኮኖሚ በማህበራዊ ጉዳይ ላይ የሚታዩ ችግሮችን እንዲቀርፍ ሊያስችላት የሚችሉ አውዶችን በመፍጠር ረገድ አሁንም ቀዳሚውን ድርሻ እየያዘች እንደምትቀጥል ያመላከተ ጉባኤ ተደርጎም ሊቆጠር ይችላል።
እንግዲህ የአፍሪካዊ ችግሮችን በአፍሪካዊ መፍትሄ እልባት ለመስጠት ወጣቶች ራሳቸውን ድርሻ እንዲወጡና በቀጣይ እንግዲህ የቀድሞውን የፓን አፍሪካኒዝም እሳቤ ሲሰሩ የነበሩ መሪዎችንም ሀሳብ ለማጠናከር እንግዲህ ባለፉት 4 ቀናት ሲካሄድ የነበረው የአፍሪካ የመጪ ጊዜ መሪዎች ጉባኤ እንግዲህ የተለያዩ ሀሳቦች የተነሱበት ኢትዮጵያ ደግሞ በተለይ አዲስ አበባ የአፍሪካውያን ቤት መሆኗን ያስመሰከረችበትና ከዚህ ቀደም ከአጠቃላይ ከዓለም ከሚገኙ የዲፕሎማቲክ መቀመጫዎች እንግዲህ ከኒውዮርክ ከጄኔቫ ቀጥሎ እንግዲህ 3ኛ መቀመጫ ናትና እዚህ ላይ በርካታ ጉባኤዎችን በስኬት ያጠናቀቀች መሆኑን አንዱ ማሳያ ነው ማለት እንችላለን። የኢትዮጵያ ቴሌቪዥን ደግሞ ይህንን ዝግጅት ከመጀመሪያው ጀምሮ እስከ መጨረሻው ከእናንተ ጋር አብራችሁ ዘልቆ ነበር። ሰለሞን አበጋዝና ሮዛ መኮንን ደግሞ መረጃዎችን ወደ እናንተ እያደረስ አብረናችሁ ቆየን። ስለተከታተላችሁን ጉባኤኑም ስትከታተሉ ስለነበር እጅጉ እናመሰግናለን። መልካም ምሽት ተመኘላችሁ።